Hi, Clive. Thank you very much for joining us today. To get us started, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Daniel, and thanks a lot for inviting me along. So I'm Clive Mitchell. I'm Head of Terrestrial Science at NatureScot. As NatureScot, we are the Scottish Government's advisors on nature and wildlife and climate. And uh, as well as being Head of Terrestrial Science, I lead our work on climate nature and consider that to be all one word because of the way that the Earth works as a system.
So, from your experience, how do you think that environmental researchers can make their work relevant to public policy?
So I think that's a lot about being responsive to what policymakers need, and that's a very dynamic environment in political democratic systems. A week being a long time in politics is typically a very short time for researchers. So I think there's something about making sure that research is framed in a way that understands how it's going to be used, particularly if it's oriented towards policy and practice. So understanding those the political cycles that govern those, and then tuning the research so that it has political relevance. And for most governments, ultimately that comes down to the costs, the benefits, and the public appetite for those interventions. And if those three things don't align, then it's really tricky to make that transition from research into policy and practice. I think it's also about understanding that there are short-term elements to that, but there are longer-term ones as well, and planning research that answers persistent problems within policy and practice. And all of those things are very relevant factors in understanding how research might land with policymakers and politicians. And understanding your audience obviously is vital to that. So what is it that motivates the politicians and policymakers that you're trying to influence, and then creating the research that addresses those narratives, as well as obviously providing the evidence to support those narratives.
How do you think interdisciplinary collaboration can enhance environmental policy development, and what has been your experience in fostering such collaborations?
I think they're absolutely vital because, insofar as we're talking about climate nature, they're complex open problems, and there's hardly a discipline that doesn't have something to bring to that party in terms of understanding the historical roots of environmental problems, that the current distribution and causes and consequences, and projecting into the future. And how we frame problems is actually really very much the starting point, and usually it's the point at which things start to unravel and go quite badly wrong, because the initial framing often is not adequate to the nature or the character of the problem that we're trying to solve. And then the role of social sciences, that it's really crucial to use that right at the beginning to understand how different people see problems and what are the risks associated with those different viewpoints if they were to dominate, as it were, in the resulting policy and practice. So right at the outset, from that kind of problem issue framing and the research questions that are then posed, all the way through to, again, at that outset, thinking about research points of view. Why are you doing this research? Why is it that you need some people to know the stuff that you're wanting to find out through the research? And how do you expect them to take that information, and what is going to motivate them to listen to your advice as opposed to someone else's advice? And then again, using social sciences to understand those cues, the governance systems that are at play, where that evidence is going to play into and when it's going to play into it, and then using that to construct the evidence, the research base, the evidence that then will feed into that, and including the communications. And so you need a cross-disciplinary approach to put all of those pieces of the jigsaw together and ensure that your research has impact.